related to the good in the classical sense. That
This is Plato.
Yeah, exactly.
This is Plato.
Exactly.
And this is Plato's argument that nobody willingly does evil. Everybody does what they conceive to be a good in some fashion.
Yeah, and you see that
Yes.
in Dante, you see the same, his whole movement. He even talks about how the people in hell, everybody is there because of,
I'm reading the Divine Comedy right now.
that's wonderful. Yeah, it's great.
Mm.
Everybody who is there because of love for a good, even if they love the good too much or they're mistaken about, let's say, the actual ultimate value of that good. Everybody moves towards a good, even if you're doing something which is completely reprehensible.
Yeah, the proposal that sin is actually failing to love wisely.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the Dante.
You see that in
Yeah,
Dante.
I have some problem with that viewpoint
Yeah.
because I think that happens. I
Yeah.
do think that happens. And I think many of the, I've talked to people like my friend Greg Hurwitz, who writes thrillers, and he crafts pretty evil characters. And we've talked about that a lot. An evil character with an ethic, so like a misplaced love, is a very interesting character. But then there's the other sorts of characters that are more Cain-like. Because Cain, his spirit, the spirit that's expressed in that story, he isn't aiming at something that's good. He's aiming at getting away with lying to God. He's aiming at getting away with making insufficient sacrifices. He's aiming at getting away eventually with murder. It's not a perversion of the good. And I think that we underestimate the problem of evil if we assume that it's merely a consequence of worshiping false idols, say. Because the idol can be it's like, I talked to you last night about the reports that Michel Foucault raped boys in graveyards. It's like, okay, he argued even formally, culturally, to abolish or at least radically reduce the age of consent. And a lot of intellectuals went along with him. And maybe you can have a discussion about that and what the age of consent could be. And maybe you can't. There's room for differences in opinion there. But when your pedophilia involves graveyard sex, then that's not a misplaced good. Like that's.
But why not, Jordan? Why isn't that? Pleasure is a good, right? And you're,
Well, it's so specific. Why the graveyard? Like there's something so dark. I think that's a place that's so dark that you can't go there without knowing that it's dark. And I do think that, I really do believe, and I've done my best to study the thought of people who've done truly reprehensible things, is that there's a level of reprehensibility where you are going there to cause the most trouble you can. And I don't see, if there's any good left in that, it's such a tiny
I'm really
spark.
going to be the devil's advocate here, knowing that there are some that do it better than others and some that don't do it as well. Even recognizing that the good that they're aiming towards is not really transcendentally
their
the good.
memory has to be working, their problem solving has
That
to
is
be
that
working.
like if I
Yeah,
like
so
I said,
they're still driven by a coherent spirit.
That's right.
Well, that's
Yeah.
what I think the spirit of Lucifer and the spirit of Goethe's Mephistopheles. That's and the spirit of Cain. That's a description of that ethic. It does it is a coherent personality.
Yeah.
And that's why there's so much, and Milton as well. There's been an attempt to delineate the ethic of evil. And it's not merely chaotic.
And one of the reasons why it's important, and maybe it's hard to see that right away, but one of the reasons why it's important, at least I find it important to formulate it this way, the way that Dante formulated it or that Plato formulated it, is that if you don't go in this direction, you end up with a dualism, and then they end up acting as like two opposites. Whereas there's the more Platonic way of setting it up, what ends up happening is that the evil always ends up just being a perversion of the good.
Right.
And
It's
therefore,
parasitic,
It's
completely
It's
parasitic.
always parasitic. And so what it does is that it makes the good truly good, and it makes it all pervasive in a way in which it can actually fill up the entire cosmos. This
Right,
idea
so
that even in the depth of hell, the love of God is there. Like you see that in a lot of the Christian mystics, that there is no place that is
Okay, so
away from
let
the
me
good.
ask you about that on the grounds of Christian theology. So, and I'm probably going to mangle this, and so correct me. Well, there's an idea that in the book of Revelation that Christ is the eternal judge, but that he's also a judge who comes back at the end of days and separates the wheat from the chaff, the damned from the saved. And the implication in that book is that many are called, but few are chosen. The judgment's pretty damn harsh. And most what? Most spirits are damned? Most people are damned? And then is that eternal, or is there a reconciliation? And so I don't know the answer to that
So
in the Christian
like,
theological
you could say
sense.
that the best way, this is the type of thing that could actually get me in trouble, but it's like the best way to formulate it, I think that we're seeing in the Orthodox tradition right now, is to say that we live in the hope of a final restoration, but that we cannot
The universal redemption.
but we cannot posit it because like you said, there seem to be two traditions in the Christian world. There's a tradition of final restoration, which you find in Revelation as well, by the way, because it says the last thing to die is death itself, right? There's the sense in which death is thrown into the fire. And so what exactly is that referring to? There's a sense in which the heavenly Jerusalem descends and fills up the entire world. So you have these images, and then you also have an image of evil being completely, let's say, cast off. And those two kind of exist in a kind of uneasy...
I was thinking about this the other day when I was thinking about making a video addressed to the Islamic world, as preposterous as that might sound. Because one of the things you want to do when you're talking to people is you want to distinguish between them as of intrinsic value and redeemable in some final sense, just as you are, and ideas that might be possessing them that have either this misplaced good element to them or this vengeful element. And so, you don't want to use a horrible cliche, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so maybe the separation of the wheat from the chaff is a spiritual discrimination that doesn't throw out the entire being along with the judgment.
If you understand it fractally, then I think that makes sense. If you read, like, for example, C.S. Lewis is a great example of someone who kind of was going in that direction, was hinting at some things. He talked about how, like, this notion that the key to hell is locked from the inside.
Right.
That no matter, even, like, I think C.S. Lewis said, like, even in the depth of hell, if Satan wanted to repent, that's
what Milton said too.
It's not happening because that's the role that's in the story. This is the character that helped me understand this part of the cosmos, or the part of the way that the world is laying itself out. And you see that in some of the Syrian fathers, for example, St. Ephrem the Syrian, he says things like that, where he says the fire in hell is the same fire that was at Pentecost. The fire in hell is the love of God. And it's only that, to the extent that you refuse to be transformed, and you hold on to your, let's say, parasitic good, that is what the fire of hell is.
Well, right. Well, part of that is that as you become more divorced from, let's say, what constitutes a sustainable and valid good, the farther you get away from that, whether it's merely by pursuing a misplaced good or it's by conscious design, the more that elevates